In this podcast episode, Joe Rogan is joined by Eric Goode and Jeremy McBride, the creators behind the HBO docuseries Monsters of God. The conversation dives deeply into the complex and shadowy world of the reptile trade, illegal wildlife trafficking, and the broader ecosystem impacts of invasive species, particularly in Florida. Eric and Jeremy share fascinating personal stories involving encounters with venomous snakes and dangerous animals, while also exploring the motivations, psychology, and culture of those obsessed with reptiles and exotic pets. The discussion further touches on endangered species, conservation efforts, illegal smuggling networks, and the intersection between wildlife crime and other illicit trades, such as narcotics. Additionally, the guests comment on cultural attitudes toward reptiles, the challenges of documentary filmmaking over many years, and the surprising world of exotic animal consumption across different cultures, especially in Asia. Eric Goode and Jeremy McBride explain the origins of Monsters of God, a documentary series centered on the illegal reptile trade and its consequences, including Florida's infamous Burmese python problem. Eric shares that his lifelong fascination with reptiles, dating back to his childhood collecting tortoises and catching rattlesnakes, served as the foundation for the project. They describe how the reptile trade has evolved over decades, starting from the pet industry's rise in the 70s and 80s through to the current enormous and often illicit international market. The series aims to shed light on an underreported, multi-billion-dollar wildlife trafficking industry that operates in the shadows yet drives significant ecological damage and extinctions. Through their globe-trotting travels, Eric and Jeremy reveal a network of smugglers, collectors, and criminals with deep ties to drugs and arms trafficking, illustrating how wildlife crime often overlaps with other illicit markets. Eric recounts his harrowing experience surviving a rattlesnake bite, detailing the symptoms, medical treatment, and recovery challenges he endured. He emphasizes the seriousness of snake bites and describes how antivenoms have evolved over the years, noting problems like serum sickness from older treatments derived from horse antibodies. A vivid story about his dog being bitten twice by a rattlesnake underscores the dangers these animals pose not only to humans, but also to pets. The conversation dispels myths about treating snake bites, warning against outdated methods such as sucking out venom or making cuts, and instead advocating immediate hospital treatment. Eric also discusses the strange cross-cultural attitudes towards snakes and venomous creatures, including why some antivenoms are no longer produced due to cost inefficiency. The guests discuss the invasive species crisis in Florida, where escaped or released exotic pets have led to ecological havoc. The Burmese python, originally popular as a pet in the 70s, is now out of control in the Everglades, preying on native wildlife and disrupting ecosystems. The debate about the python's origins touches on theories ranging from pet owners releasing them to hurricane damage to reptile research facilities. Additionally, the rampant spread of green iguanas and other invasive lizards causes problems for local vegetation and property. Eric shares examples of the local culture of hunting and even consuming iguanas, illustrating the complex relationship humans have with these non-native species, both as pests and food sources. One of the most unsettling parts of the conversation focuses on the dark underbelly of wildlife trafficking. Eric and Jeremy expose how trafficking reptiles, especially rare species, is entangled with drug smuggling, gun running, and organized crime. They recount stories of smugglers using ingenious methods to conceal contraband drugs inside animals, or mixing them among wildlife shipments, creating enormous enforcement challenges. The documentary's inclusion of individuals like Mario Tawi, a notorious figure with a violent criminal past linked to both drugs and wildlife crime, highlights the perilous nature of investigating and documenting this world. Law enforcement perspectives, including those from DEA agents, help frame the dangerous cat-and-mouse game played between traffickers and officials. Eric and Jeremy reflect on the peculiar passion and obsession that defines the reptile enthusiast subculture, often involving herpers who covet rare, exotic, living art. This fascination can lead to hoarding, illegal collection, and unsustainable demand for scarce species. The guests explore the psychology behind extreme attachment to animals that are cold, distant, and at times dangerous, unlike more relatable mammals or charismatic fauna. They describe freak shows and the almost ritualistic, sometimes dysfunctional behaviors surrounding reptile ownership and commerce. This psychology also crosses paths with crime, drug culture, and affluent collectors, creating a volatile but fascinating social niche documented in the series. The conversation reveals the arduous process of making Monsters of God, which was nearly 2 decades in the making since Eric read the Lizard King book in 2008. The film crew's persistence in securing trust and access within a notoriously secretive world is highlighted, alongside logistical challenges and evolving story arcs. The creators emphasize that their work is not scripted, but relies on long-term relationships and following complex narratives over years. They recognize that the subject matter is niche, sometimes disturbing, and not always easy to market, but they are committed to exposing these hidden worlds for education and impact. They also note their pattern of exploring eccentric obsessions and extreme personalities across different animal-related projects, such as Chimp Crazy and Tiger King. A key conservation story threaded through the discussion involves rare and endangered species like the Malagasy plowshare tortoise and the Yunnan box turtle. Eric shares his personal involvement in breeding and attempting to save tortoises that are critically endangered due to poaching and the exotic pet trade. The show documents the first successful captive breeding of the plowshare tortoise, a milestone achieved after many years, which presents cautious hope for species recovery. However, the dangers of reintroducing captive animals back into heavily poached wild habitats are stressed, as are ethical and practical dilemmas surrounding legalizing rare species trade as a potential way to reduce pressure on wild populations. Eric and Jeremy delve into why reptiles are often feared, vilified, or simply misunderstood compared to mammals. They attribute this partly to innate or genetic fears rooted in evolutionary history, compounded by cultural portrayals and religious symbolism associated with serpents and reptiles. The guests talk about the impact of media and pop culture, Disney, Harry Potter, and Jurassic Park, in shaping public perceptions and driving demand for exotic pets. They contrast reptiles' cold-blooded, alien-like qualities to mammals' empathetic appeal, theorizing why reptiles struggle for mainstream compassion despite their undeniable ecological importance. A startling part of the discussion focuses on the widespread demand for rare animals as luxury foods and medicine in parts of Asia, particularly China and Southeast Asia. The guests describe massive turtle farms, snake bars where live cobras are bled into drinks, and tiger farms that supply illicit parts like tiger bone wine and tiger penis, believed to have medicinal or aphrodisiac properties. They discuss giant salamander farms, exotic reptile markets, and the consumption culture behind these endangered species. The conversation links these practices to international trafficking routes, highlighting the enormous sums of money involved and their role in driving species endangerment. The podcast highlights the convergence of wildlife trafficking with narcotics, arms smuggling, and organized crime. Eric and Jeremy describe how traffickers exploit porous borders, limited enforcement, and clever concealment methods to evade detection. Stories of crates filled with reptiles masking drugs and corrupt officials complicate law enforcement efforts. The series sheds light on the blurred lines between dealers, collectors, and criminals, painting a complex picture where bad guys and law enforcement sometimes share similar traits. Discussions also touch on sentencing disparities, illustrating how wildlife crime penalties are often lower than for other serious offenses, but contribute to repeat offenses and ongoing harm. Towards the end, Eric emphasizes stories of hope amid the crisis, such as the captive breeding and slow recovery of extremely rare tortoises and efforts to protect remaining wild populations from poaching. They discuss difficult conservation decisions, including managing reintroduction programs and addressing threats from invasive species and human development. The complexity of balancing human interests, cultural practices, and ecological integrity is underscored as a major challenge going forward. The creators give a glimpse into upcoming documentary projects exploring other unusual animal subcultures and lesser-known species facing threats. They reveal interests in covering overfishing, marine species, and often overlooked invertebrates and insects, aiming to raise awareness of biodiversity loss beyond the flagship charismatic animals. The theme of uncovering eccentric, obsessed, or fringe animal-related communities continues to guide their storytelling approach. Their work aims to reach broader audiences by blending eye-catching, sometimes shocking elements with deeper education and conservation messaging.